Welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pit. We're at the middle of the week, and we are here to get your Wednesday started. Remember, get your morning shower, your morning shave, your morning pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where we get together every day of the week, Monday through Friday, and talk about whatever's going on in the world of Pitt sports. And this week, Pitt happens to be off. No football game this Saturday, as the Panthers are at the midpoint of the season. So we're taking this week to kind of look over whatever's going on. Of course, the news yesterday, Izzy Abanikanda was named the Doak Walker Player of the Week, National Player of the Week. Follows the Walter Camp Foundation naming him National Player of the Week. Obviously, ACC gave him a lot of honors. Look, when you run for 320 yards and 6 touchdowns, you're going to get some recognition, and Izzy Abanikanda is certainly grabbing that. We've talked about him a lot this week. Talked about it a lot on Monday. Talked about him a lot yesterday as we broke down offensive personnel. I don't think there's much more to say other than just sort of the basic, just being very interested to see what the next 6 games hold for Izzy Abanikanda, given that Rodney Hammond is likely to return soon, and that they're going to need to and hope to and look to find ways to get more out of the passing game, which if they start finding more success from the pass, you would think that will take some of the opportunities away from the running backs. So how the usage numbers and how the offense gets sort of split up over the next 6 games and where the ball goes and who gets to touch the ball the most is going to be really interesting to watch. But like I said, we spent a lot of time yesterday on the Morning Pit talking about the offense. And if you missed that video, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Turn on your notifications so you get an alert sent to your phone, and you'll always know when we post a new Morning Pit video each day of the week, Monday through Friday. You'll also know when we go live for our Panther-Lair show, like we're going to do tonight at 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And you'll know when we go live. Pitt's game at Louisville next weekend is an 8 o'clock kickoff. I'm thinking we'll probably start our post-game show after that game around midnight. Not entirely sure because it depends on how the game goes and how long the game goes. If you're worried about missing it, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications, then you'll get an alert sent to your phone, and it'll say, hey, Panther-Lair's going live for the post-game show. Better get ready. Get your beer and get your hot takes and join the live stream. And so if you don't want to miss it, make sure you subscribe. Also, do us a solid here and like this video. We'd very much appreciate that. And we appreciate everybody who's been watching the videos and checking it out and hitting the like button and hitting the subscribe, leaving comments and all those things. We really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun to do these videos. And this week is sort of an interesting one because, most weeks we have sort of a rhythm. Now's the day when we talk about the 2 deep. Now's the day when we break down this. Now's the day when we look at that. And, as we've gone kind of week to week through the season, we've settled into a nice rhythm and a nice routine. But here we are in an off week. And so I think it's given us a chance to kind of hit the reset button as far as taking a step back and looking at the big picture of this team as it stands after 6 games. We know they're 4-2. We know they're 1-1 in the ACC. We know where they stand in that regard. But what about sort of individually, what have we seen? We talked a lot about offensive personnel yesterday, and I think the offense is going to continue to be a topic for the rest of the week. But I do want to talk about the defense today. I think the defense merits some discussion because, kind of as the headline question says, is Pitt's defense good enough right now? And you look at point totals. I mean, it was 45-29 against Virginia Tech. They ultimately gave up 22 points in that game. One of the touchdowns came on a blocked punt that was recovered. But I mean, overall, if you look at kind of raw numbers, Pitt's opponents are averaging 26.2 points per game. That's 11th in the ACC right now. It seems low. It seems like if you can hold opponents under 30 points, you're going to be in pretty good shape. But that ranks number 11 in the conference. They gave up 31 to West Virginia, gave up 34 to Tennessee, held Western Michigan and Rhode Island. Western Michigan scored 13, Rhode Island scored 24. Georgia Tech only scored 26, and we know the issue in that game was the offense until the very end when the defense gave up some big plays. And then they held Virginia Tech to 22 offensive points, 29 total. Overall, I mean, the point total's not terrible. They haven't had that 40-point game. The most they've given up was 34, and that was in an overtime game. So they gave up 27 in regulation. So the most they've given up in regulation has been 31 points. And that was against West Virginia in the season opener. And yet, I think there's a bit of a feeling of unease about this defense right now, and there's a variety of reasons for it. And I want to talk about some individual guys in a second. But if I had to sum it up, I mean, probably the most concerning thing right now, and the thing that you look at and say, oh, this is a problem, and it's not typically what we see, it's the run defense. Pitt is rush defense. They're allowing 125.3 yards per game, which is 5th in the ACC. But Pat Narduzzi said it after the Virginia Tech game. He was asked, how would you assess how the defense has played so far this year? He said, quote, just average at times. We'll look at the tape. That first half, I've just never been around where we get the ball run on us. I'm not used to it. So we'll reevaluate where we are. Going on, he says, there's just no, I don't like that. I don't like anybody running the football on us. If you want to throw it, but don't let them be two-dimensional. We let them run it in the first half. And then he talks about how they made adjustments in the second half and feels like they improved. But the reality is the run defense has been a concern this season. Not necessarily every week, and that's how you end up giving up, on average 125 yards per game. When you hold Western Michigan to 50 rushing yards and you hold Rhode Island to 63 rushing yards. But it's 3 big games this season that I think are really concerning. And it started in the season opener against West Virginia when that, whatever his name, the tight end who was lining up at running back had like 7 carries for a bunch of yards. And they end up with 33 carries, 33 rushing attempts as a team for 190 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's a big problem. That's a concerning total, the likes of which we don't typically see from this defense, or at least haven't seen in the past few years, or really at all since Pat Narduzzi got to Pitt. I mean, there haven't been many games where teams, other than Georgia Tech under Paul Johnson, where teams have been able to run the ball like that with that level of success against Pitt's defense. And then the Georgia Tech game, 44 rushing attempts for 232 yards. That's virtually unheard of. Again, not necessarily against Georgia Tech, because Paul Johnson was calling the triple option offense and they ran the ball 50 times a game and they ended up with 200 or 300 rushing yards. And it actually kind of skewed some of Pitt's defensive numbers. That Pitt's rush defense was better than it seemed, or better than the national ranking would indicate, because you had this, all these strong performances, 120, 110, 90, 80, that's how many yards you were allowed. And then this one game where you gave up 430 yards, and it was because you were playing Georgia Tech with the triple option. And so the run defense was good, but this isn't Paul Johnson's rushing attack anymore at Georgia Tech. This is something approaching a more, standard offense, typical offense, modern offense, whatever you want to call it. It's not the triple option. And they ran 44 times for 232 yards. And then even this Virginia Tech game, 30 rushing attempts for 126 yards and 2 touchdowns. 126, you give up 126 in a game, that's not that bad, but they did it on 30 carries. You're still looking at better than 4 yards per attempt. So 3 out of 6 games this year, you've given up 190 to West Virginia, 232 to Georgia Tech, and $126 to Virginia Tech. Now, for comparison, last season, in 14 games, Tennessee went 33 carries for 136. Western Michigan ran for $160, but that was on 48 rushing attempts. New Hampshire just barely squeaked into 100 yards because they had a 70-yard run. They finished with 29 carries for 100 yards, and that included a long run of 70 yards. Clemson went 30 for 164. That was one where you got beat on the run. Duke ran for 135 yards, but they took 50 carries to do it. And none of the other final 5 opponents of the season topped 100 yards. So you had in total 5 games out of 14 where you gave up 100 rushing yards to an opponent. And that included, again, New Hampshire going 29 for 100 with a 70-yard run. It included Western Michigan going 48 for 160 with 48 attempts. And same thing, Duke 50 for 135. You set those 3 aside where, teams were... it was just sheerly volume or one play. New Hampshire, you really had the Tennessee game, 33 for 136, and you had the Clemson game, 30 for 164. And otherwise, you didn't really let anybody get over 100 yards or produce. And if they did get over 100 yards, they didn't produce it in any kind of an efficient fashion. That was a really good run defense, and it didn't show the holes and the gaps that this year's run defense does. Now, why is it? Why is the run defense such a problem? What are the issues? And obviously, we've asked Pat Narduzzi about this throughout the season. I mean, when the season opener, they give up 190 yards and 2 touchdowns on 33 carries, there are going to be questions right off the bat. Hey, what's wrong with your run defense giving up 6 yards a carry here? And the contention has been that guys are just not lined up right. That it's not necessarily getting beat physically, but guys are lining up in the wrong place, taking the wrong angle, creating creases in the defense, and the way the defense is designed, the way they're all jammed up trying to stop the run, it doesn't really account for anyone sort of playing out of position or giving up, being aligned incorrectly or taking the wrong angle. It doesn't account for that, because once that happens, it's such a front to back, all 11 fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. On this defense, particularly the run defense, that if one guy is sort of out of place, I don't think there's really an opportunity to sort of adjust for it. If one guy's out of place, there's a spot you can, take off for a long run. And so, I mean, Rhode Island had a 63-yard run. Georgia Tech had a 63-yard run. West Virginia had a 44-yard run. They're giving up these bigger runs. Funny thing about Rhode Island, sort of a statistical oddity. Rhode Island finished the game against Pitt with 22 rushing attempts as a team for 63 net rushing yards, and that included a long run of 63 yards. So obviously sacks and whatnot will draw down those numbers, and take off the rushing total. But it's funny to see a team have 63 net rushing yards and a long run of 63. But what's happening in these situations where they're getting gashed, where they're getting beat with the run? I think there's probably some truth to what Narduzzi is saying. I don't think it's necessarily just coach speak when he talks about guys being aligned incorrectly or taking the wrong angles. I mean, the reality is if it was coach speak, he would be trying to avoid throwing anyone under the bus. And when he says that players are not lining up in the right spot, he's and that they're not being coached well enough, he's throwing everyone under the bus. I don't think it takes too much to put a lot of this on the outside linebackers. And they're sort of an easy target, but not necessarily an incorrect one. Those guys are all new. Shane Simon just transferred in from Notre Dame. Tyler Wiltz, who's gotten more playing time recently and maybe is not as much of a source of the problem in some of the earlier games. But he just transferred in from Southeast Missouri. Bengali Kamara playing for the first time as a junior, and Solomon DeShields really playing for the first time as a redshirt sophomore. Those guys had snaps previously, but they not nearly the volume that they're getting right now. Kamara has been a starter all season. DeShields has played a lot all season, and it's more action than those guys have seen. And Pat Narduzzi's favorite anecdote all year has been Bengali Kamara coming up to him after the West Virginia game and saying, "Coach, it's a lot different in the game than it was in practice." And Narduzzi keeps sharing that anecdote, even though it was from week 1, but I think it still applies as you go into the off week here after 6 games. That they're still trying to adjust to playing in this defense in the speed of the game. Look, I don't know if there is anybody who got more praise in training camp than Bengali Kamara. And that was, I know I praised him a lot. I talked him up a lot and really raved about how good he was going to be. And I stand by a lot of what I said because I believed it. I knew what I was seeing. And more importantly, I knew what I was hearing from people who were watching more practice and were smarter than me and know more about football than me and know more about the team than me. And all I heard were just rave reviews on and off the record. I mean, not just what they're saying standing in there in the press conference, but when you get a chance to talk to different guys, but hey, what's going on with 11? It seems like he's getting a lot of pub. But yeah, he's going to be the real deal. I mean, this is what you heard from people. That period of adjustment, that transition to being on the field as much as he's been on the field, that transition to being a starter and sort of a mainstay of the defense. He's a starter in the base defense. He's a starter in the Delta defensive package. He doesn't come off the field on third down. That transition has been a rocky one at times. I think he played well against Virginia Tech. I thought he had a good game there. He almost had his first interception. I thought he was going to get it. It ended up having to be a pass breakup, but he had 6 tackles. Oh, I thought he had a sack too. He didn't. He had 6 tackles and a pass breakup. He had a sack in the game before that. Solomon Shields had a sack, and those two guys sort of are kind of linked in my mind, at least. I mean, they came in with the same recruiting class, similar sort of profiles of players as being sort of athletes rather than just natural linebackers. And I know that might get held against them sometimes. Well, you just need a real linebacker in there, and I get that. But The reality is this defense has never really operated with three quote-unquote real linebackers, guys who played linebacker in high school and sort of naturally transitioned in. I mean, you look at last year, and I think when people talk about Kamara and Simon sort of being a drop-off from last season, I mean, the guys they would have been a drop-off from were Cam Bright, Phil Campbell, and John Patrician. Patrician was the safety. Campbell was the safety. Came to Pitt as a safety. Patrician might have come to Pitt as a linebacker, but I mean, he was a safety out of high school and went to Penn State as a safety before he transferred. And Cam Bright was like all over the place. He was like a defensive end in high school, very undersized, but I mean, that's what he was doing, just rushing the passer. So these guys, none of these guys were sort of traditional linebackers, but what they were all like fifth and fourth or fifth or sixth year seniors, and that was the big difference. And they had experience. They'd played in this defense for a while, and they knew how to play, and they knew what to do, and they knew what the defense needed for them, and they knew how to get lined up, and they knew how to execute the defense. And so I look at Kamara, and I look at Simon, and I look at Wiltz, and I look at DeShields, and I say, I think these guys have all the physical tools that you need. I don't think any of them is a bad player, and I think Pitt's defense can succeed with all of these guys. What we're finding is that whole taking lumps while they learn what they're supposed to do and really kind of grasp it and understand how to make the right reads and get lined up properly in a game, it takes a little bit of time. And you'd like to think it'll only take a game or two. I mean, to this point, it's sort of taken 5 or 6. You might say, I mean, even I was going to say, well, you might say they didn't really do that bad in the Virginia Tech game, and I'm still giving up more than 4 yards per carry. And as Pat Narduzzi said, he was not happy with the run defense at all in that game. And so, basically through 6 games, certainly through 5, the play hasn't been good enough against the run. And that's a big concern because I think at this point, 8 years in, we've all accepted that this defense is going to give up plays in the pass, right? They're going to give up big passing plays. It's just kind of part of it. I mean, we all sat through 2016. We've seen what this defense can be at its absolute worst when it comes to defending the pass. We watched Deshaun Watson throw for 6,000 yards. We watched Mitch Trubisky throw for 6,000 yards, and Mason Rudolph and Daniel Jones. I think Brad Kaya had a big game. I mean, like, it was just week after friggin' the guy from Virginia Tech, that Thursday night game with all the push-offs, whatever it was, 36-33 or 39-36 or something like that. That guy who never had a chance to play in the NFL, Jared Evans or whatever it was, he goes over 300 yards. I mean, it was just week after week of bombs, just totally decimating this defense. And so I think we were all so sort of shattered by that we've just kind of understand it and expect it. But the one thing they were always going to be able to do, and the one thing they were designed to do, the one thing that, because of the emphasis on stopping the run, they were susceptible to things like Mason Rudolph in 2017 or these different RPO offenses and can get sucked in on play action. But we could always count on that, though. We could rely on Pitt stopping the run. Right now, after 6 games, we can't. They're half and half right now, and against 3 of the better teams they've played, they've given up a lot on the ground. Not against Tennessee, but that was sort of a different game. They put the ball in Hendon Hooker's hands. Now, how much of a concern is this going forward? And I think there's a couple of different things to look at. I don't know which way to go first. We go to the good side first or the bad side first? Well, I'll go on the bad side first. Because out of Pitt's 6 remaining opponents, 4 of them are ranked in the top 6 in the ACC in rushing offense. Louisville is averaging 207 rushing yards per game. They lead the conference in rushing. Duke is averaging 190.7 rushing yards per game. That's 4th in the conference, right behind Pitt, actually. Syracuse with Sean Tucker, 190.4. And North Carolina is 6th in the league at 183.2 rushing yards per game. Miami and Virginia, they're in the bottom half. Virginia's 12th. They're only averaging like $129. They're not very good at running the ball, but they're not very good at anything offensively right now. But this is concerning. All right, you've got a run defense that has been far more susceptible and vulnerable than it ever should be. Far more susceptible and vulnerable than it's designed to be. And they're coming up against 4 out of their final 6 opponents are all averaging 183 rushing yards per game or more. That's a big concern. Now, I mean, there's sort of caveats in it. Louisville, averaging, what did I say that was, 207.2 rushing yards per game. They have 1,243 rushing yards so far through 6 games. Malik Cunningham himself has 457 of those. So you're looking at more than a third of the rushing yards coming from Malik Cunningham, and really those were just in the first 5 games because he didn't play this past week due to, concussion symptoms. So maybe, Pitt's going to Louisville next weekend. I don't know what the outlook is on Cunningham, if he's going to be ready to go or if he's going to be, still sidelined. I would guess he'll be back by then, but that's a part of it. And it's a part that you have to kind of monitor. And, and we talked about this all offseason as I sort of talked about this Louisville game looming on the horizon this season, trying to think of running quarterbacks who have sort of had that success against Pitt. I think Jeff Sims got out and made some plays against Pitt 2 weeks ago with the Georgia Tech game. And Malik Cunningham is a threat to do that as well, and that's going to test and put pressure on those outside linebackers again. But Cunningham's status is going to be something that, has an impact on this game when you look at Louisville's rushing game and rushing attack and how important he is to it. But you've got, like I say, 4 out of these final 6 teams have been successful running the ball this year. And that's concerning for Pitt. You need to, you need to be able to stop the run. That's what this defense is built to do. And if you're unable to do it, you're going to put yourself in some real trouble. Now, the upside, I think, and this is, I can't put the statistics out there because it's more sort of based on faith or hope or whatever you want to call it, and that's not a good strategy. But Kamara is, in terms of experience, a young player. Simon, in terms of experience in this defense, is a young player. Wiltz, in terms of experience in this defense, is a young player. DeShields, in terms of experience, is a young player. And when you have young players who are physically gifted, and I think all 4 of those guys are to varying degrees, but I think they're all talented enough to play at the Power 5 level, when you have physical ability and you're just lacking experience, you can make that up. It's a lot harder to make up the physical side than it is the experience side and the mental side. I think if you've got that baseline of physical talent, which I think these guys do, I think you can slowly sort of build up that other side of it. And I think they have been, and I think they'll continue to. And I think this off week is a good time to sort of refocus on some of the fundamentals and the alignments and angles and things like that. They do need to improve. I think they can. And I think by the end of the season, I think those guys can be playing well. I think by next year, we could be talking about the linebackers as a real strength. Maybe I anticipated how quickly they would make that adjustment, how quickly they would be able to, sort of slide into those roles and play at a high level. But I think you see little signs each week of those guys getting better. And if they can get better, particularly against the run in a hurry, that would be quite helpful. But the outside linebackers aren't the only question mark. A big problem has been the defensive ends. And, we're going to talk about sack numbers. We're going to talk about pressure numbers and things like that. And Pat Narduzzi has said all season, quarterbacks are getting the ball out quick. They're getting rid of the ball fast. They're doing this, they're doing that, and that's neutralizing. And that's fine. But, I mean, these guys weren't unknowns last season. The defensive ends, Haba Baldonado, John Morgan, Deslin Alexander, they've been around for a while. And they weren't all fresh on the scene players last year. They were known. And they still managed to go off. I mean, Baldonado had 9 sacks last season. I think John Morgan had 5.5. Altogether, the defensive ends, according to my quick, yellow pad math, had 20.5 sacks last season in 14 games. This year, through 6, all of the defensive ends combined have 3.5 sacks. And you can talk about getting rid of the ball fast. You can talk about running different things to try and neutralize the D ends and all this different stuff. But you have to be able to produce better than that. And it's simply a lack of production. 3.5 sacks from the entire defensive end group through 6 games. Habba Baldonado had 9 sacks last year. He has 0.5 sacks this year. He does not have a full sack to his name. He has a sack assist. That, again, I mean, we could talk down the hope and faith road, and again, that's not a great strategy, but it might be all we have right now. I mean, there is a history of Habba Baldonado and John Morgan producing. Deslin Alexander has had good seasons in the past. They're missing Dayon Hayes, and I'm not sure when he's going to come back. At some point this season, I would presume. But Baldonado, Morgan, Alexander have to be able to produce at a higher level than they have. You know, I mean, they have to. They simply have to get to the quarterback. And they're not getting killed by the pass right now. It's not crushing them. I'm more concerned about the rush defense, as a matter of fact. But if you keep giving quarterbacks time like this, if you continue to not get pressure on those guys, if you continue to not put up sack numbers, the pass offense is going to excel for the opponents. And the pass defense is going to start taking more hits, because we know you can beat this defense downfield if you have time. But the whole thing is predicated on disrupting your timing, on getting into the backfield, forcing your throw, forcing you into a bad decision or a bad throw, or simply a sack or a throwaway. That's what this whole thing is predicated on, and it's not really happening. Not consistently enough, not from the defensive ends. Kalijah Kancey's been great. I mean, I think he has played really well. He has 8.5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks through 6 games. That's roughly, I mean, in terms of sacks, he's basically on the same pace he was last year when he finished with 7 over 14 games. And he's on a better pace than he was a year ago in tackles for loss. Last year, he finished the season with 13 tackles for loss. He's got 8.5 already. And so I think Kalijah Kancey's playing well. I think he's more or less living up to his, the standards and the expectations that he had coming into the season. I think the one thing that's missing from him is just like a monster game. You know what I mean? 3 sacks, or like 2 sacks and 3.5 tackles for loss, or something, or 1.5 sacks and 3.5 tackles for loss, like a big game like that. But he's also facing a whole lot more attention than he ever did at any point in his career. And to still go out, 6 games in with 8.5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks, it's pretty solid. It's pretty solid. The defensive ends just have to step up. You have to get more production out of that group. We talked about the outside linebackers. I think Gervasio Dennis has been fine. He's got, he already has 4 sacks, and he had 4 all of last season. He's got 5 tackles for loss. He had 9.5 last season. So he's tackles for loss, he's right on track with where he was a year ago. Sacks, he's actually way ahead of his pace from a year ago. What'll be interesting to see, and I don't know if they'll do this, for a variety of reasons, but he came out in the second half against Virginia Tech, didn't play after halftime due to injury. And Shane Simon stepped in at middle linebacker, played almost the entire second half. I think Nick Lappy got a couple snaps in the middle there to give Simon a breather, but Simon played middle linebacker the entire second half of that game. And I thought he was fine. You know what I mean? I thought he did a decent job. Pat Narduzzi joked that that maybe Simon had jumped Dennis because the run defense seemed to improve in the second half. And I mean, he was joking, but maybe there's something to look into there. And what I'm thinking is, if you do trust Simon in the middle of the defense, if you trust Shane Simon to run the middle linebacker spot, then maybe you can move around a little bit and give Gervasio Dennis some of the snaps outside, maybe at money linebacker, or maybe even at star. Rotate him in with Kamara, or rotate him in at the money spot. Maybe just flip him and Simon, you know what I mean, for a game. And run Simon in the middle and run Dennis outside, and occasionally give Dennis some snaps in the middle to give Shane Simon some breaks. But I think you have some opportunities to move around now. Again, if you were comfortable with how Shane Simon played in the middle of the defense last week against Virginia Tech. So that's going to be something to watch, particularly if you feel like maybe you get a better look, either in creating pressure or in defending the run. And we know how important that is. Secondary, I don't really have any issues with. I think, some more turnovers would be good. I mean, they've got a few interceptions already this season, but I think A.J. Woods has probably been the guy that's been picked on the most. He seems to have given up plays the most, but I still like his ability and think he can kind of rebound and play through it and get better as he works in that rotation with Marquez Williams and MJ Devonshire. But I think the corners have been fine overall. I think the safeties, for the most part, I mean, they've had their issues. Eric Hallett took a bunch of, had a couple pass interference penalties last week. Brandon Hill sort of infamously got run over on a play 2 weeks ago. But I think overall, I think they've been fine. You know what I mean? I think they've been fine. I don't have any issues with the secondary. I'm more concerned about the run defense and the linebackers and creating pressure from the defensive ends. I think if Pitt's defense is going to focus on anything this week, and I mean, I'm sure they're going to focus on a lot of things, but if I'm going to choose a couple areas that they really need to improve, it's going to be those two. That's where they need to get better and get better in a hurry going into these final 6 games. So that's our look at the defense, some thoughts on the defense and what needs to get better, where they've been so far. I'd like to know what you think. Go in the comment section or go on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com and share your thoughts on Pitt's defense and what you've seen out of that unit over the first 6 games. I told you what my concerns are, and I'd like to hear from you as well. So Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, where we cover all the Pitt sports news, football, basketball, and recruiting. And then just as importantly, maybe more so, talk about it on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And then, of course, YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com is the YouTube address. That's our YouTube page. You can click the subscribe button. Oh, my finger was off the screen. You can click the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you get an alert sent to your phone whenever whenever we post a new video or whenever we go live for a live stream like we're doing tonight at 8:30 or after the game on next Saturday, after the Louisville game. You'll get an alert so you know when we go live. You don't have to worry about, wow, what is it? I didn't see the tweet. What time are they going live? You don't have to worry about it. We got it all taken care of. So hit that subscribe button. And, of course, like this video, too. We appreciate that very much. So thanks, everybody who watched the video today. Remember, we'll be live tonight at 8:30 for the Panther-Lair show. If you've been hearing me say things all week and you want to yell at me about them, you can go to the chat screen and during the live Panther-Lair show, and you can post all your angry remarks, and I will read and respond to as many of them as I am so inclined. So 8:30 p.m. tonight, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks again for checking out the video today. Hope you have a great Wednesday, and we will talk to you tonight for the live show, and then tomorrow morning for the Thursday edition of the Morning Pit right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.